Dada Morero has been elected as the new mayor of Johannesburg. Let's now get some analysis as we're joined by political analyst Musa Mdunge. Mr. Mdunge, a pleasure to have you on the program this evening. Firstly, what are your initial thoughts on Dada Morero's election as the new Joburg mayor? And how does this outcome compare to previous mayoral transitions, also in terms of the impact on local politics?
Thank you so much for having me. Good evening to you and to your viewers. Certainly today's events, were expected. This has been, in the works for quite some time. You will recall that as long as last year already, President Cyril Ramaphosa already made his announcement that, Dada Morero should become the mayor of Johannesburg in a bid that I believe the ANC saw the importance of a city like Johannesburg in, regaining lost ground. And so the move today, as we see it with him, rising to the mayoral post for a second time is, I think, for the ANC a good one if it will result in the stability that is required in this local municipality, a municipality that we must remember is the heartbeat of the South African economy. It is the home of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. It is a home of several companies that are headquartered in Johannesburg. And so the city is very critical to any plan by this government of national unity, as they call themselves, to be able to revive the South African economy.
Musa, how does Morero's approach to leadership and also his vision for Johannesburg also fit into the broader image of what residents in the city can expect?
Well, look, he is a tried and tested, member of the ANC in terms of the politics that dominate the Johannesburg region and by extension, Gauteng. And his ability seen by the fact that, when you think of the likes of Umkhonto weSizwe, they supported his election bid. You look at parties like IFP also did the same. And his ability alongside the leadership of the ANC in the province were able to get Action SA to join their side. And so the ability to build a broad coalition of parties is perhaps, symbiotic of the kind of leader that he is. He has been able to understand the unique politics that govern, Johannesburg. Now the question is, will he be able to chart a new way forward in the way that the city can be governed? Bearing in mind that we are about 2 years away from the local government elections, and as well as how does he then justify his ability to bring change in this city, given the dismal performance of his predecessor, whom his party supported, by the way, in a compromise deal with the economic freedom fighters last year in the likeness of Kabelo Gwamanda. So he has to therefore, be able to provide answers and rebuttals to his connection to the instability that has governed the city in the past, 8 years, but at the same time, be able to paint himself as the right person for the job to bring about the necessary stability, but the vision and the plan to govern the local municipality that gains the most in terms of budget.
So we've discussed Morero's approach to leadership, also discussing his vision for Johannesburg and how it fits within the broader historical context of the city's political and economic evolution. But what do you perceive as the most significant challenges that Mayor Morero will face, especially as he takes over this new role, particularly given the recent resignation of Kabelo Gwamanda as well, and the changes that we saw to the executive?
Indeed. Look, the first challenge for him is to establish a strong mayoral committee that will be able to support the work that he needs to do. It is of benefit that he was obviously the MMC of finance, and that would largely, put him at the center of, the economic machinery, of both the local government, but, to the broader extent, the province. And so he's got to think about how does he revive the Johannesburg economy? How does he ensure that Johannesburg is not just only a center for services and finances, but revives its place as not as a place of commerce, as a place where, if we think of the digital economy,
Yeah.
Johannesburg has a huge role that it can play, but also on issues such as energy, on manufacturing, on the tourism space and hospitality. These are spaces that he has got to really bring about a concrete plan and get the kind of political support that he needs. But I think more importantly than that, he's got to be able to assemble the right talent that may not necessarily be political in scope, but has the kind of industry talent that is able to inform policy production and implementation. I think that will be key. If he is able to really mark down 2 or 3 areas of key focus for Johannesburg that he can mark out to the electorate as areas that they can judge him by in the next 2 years, he will do well in what I think is, Cyril Ramaphosa's ultimate plan here of what he's trying to do is fix local government, because he sees that as being the route in which the ANC can revive its dismal support in the country. And so a person like Morero is very critical in that plan. And if he pulls it off, it may have benefit to his own political future.
Musa, also very interesting, in his acceptance speech, Morero mentions the need to reimagine Johannesburg and make it a world-class city, if you will. How realistic are these aspirations, also given the current socio-economic landscape of Johannesburg?
Certainly, these are huge challenges for the mayor, particularly if you think of how the flow of urbanization is moving in the country. And so Gauteng, and particularly Johannesburg, continues to face new pressures, from other provinces, but as well as, from the rest of the continent, where Johannesburg is one of those centers of immigration. So that's going to be a very huge challenge for the mayor. Of course, this idea of a world-class city is not new. It doesn't start with him. It dates back to the days of Parkstau, who was then the mayor of Johannesburg and currently serving as a minister in the government of national unity. And so while there seems to be a consistency in this goal that each of these mayors seem to be thinking of, but in terms of what gets us there, what gets Johannesburg there, that's where the question is. Certainly, if you have a continuing challenge of electricity, it's hard to imagine how you can become a world-class city.
Yeah.
If your railway is not working, it's hard to imagine how you can become a world-class city. If accommodation, if housing is expensive and unaffordable, and in essence, there's inequality in that sense, then it's hard to imagine how you build a world-class city. These are the things that his government has got to think about. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a consistency of implementation of policy from national cascading all the way down to local government. And unless the center holds, unless the tone is set from the top, from the president, from his cabinet, it is hard to imagine how the Johannesburg mayor can therefore exercise any sort of uniqueness here and magic in turning around this city. Because what the electorate have certainly awoken to is that government works as a unit. And so failures in one segment of government has a way of impacting other spheres of government. And given that, unless we see a concrete national plan to turn around local governments, it's hard to imagine how he shall do best.
So Morero also emphasized planning with the community. In your view, what are the most effective strategies for fostering a genuine community involvement, especially in local governance?
Well, one of the benefits of our electoral system, particularly as it pertains to local government, is that you have this mixture between proportionality as well as first past the post, where we are able to vote for our councillors. And given that, it means that the electorate has a direct connection to their local government through their ward councillor. And so one of the ways in which he can effectively create the synergy between both government and the community is to strengthen the engagement between ward councillors as well as the wards in which they serve, but as well as to reduce the bottlenecks that impact the effectiveness of councillors to respond to the needs of their communities. So there's got to be a belief and a confidence again that if I engage my councillor, that has a huge chance of effecting a particular change. And so if we don't see a change in that particular engagement, we will continue to see the events as we have seen before. You know, if you think about the death of the Johannesburg leader, the EFF leader, if you think of other events across the country where councillors have been killed, you know, it's important that communication be reestablished between both the state as well as communities. So in terms of that, it's good that he is sounding, you know, the right notes in terms of that direction. Now, whether we begin to see that will be the question. Another way, of course, is to look at issues like, you know, increasing the engagement between the mayor's office as well as communities through indabas, but also random checks, random inspections by the mayoral team in Johannesburg offices and Johannesburg departments will be another way in which the city brings to life the importance of accountability, the importance of presence, of being on the ground, and the importance of the government truly listening to the voice of the people and how that can bring effective change. So if he does it well, it truly could be groundbreaking.
So, Musa, how do you think the resignation of the former mayor, Kabelo Gwamanda, and the subsequent changes in the executive roles will affect the city's administration, but also policy continuity?
Well, look, in terms of policy continuity, you know, I suspect that there may be some changes that will happen. We know of how unpopular, you know, some of the policies under Gwamanda were pertaining to, you know, rates increases. So there may be a shift in terms of policy, in terms of those policies, given their unpopularity. But in terms of the broader sort of nexus, in terms of where policy moves, I think we very much as if we were back in 2021, basically dealing again with a new administration. Yes, it's the same ANC, the same sort of parties that will make up the machinations of the government. But fundamentally, you know, this is a guy who is likely to put his own personality into his mayorship. And so, unfortunately, we are not likely to see the kind of policy implementation that we would like to see at this stage of any government that is really past the halfway period of its term. And that is perhaps the tragedy of these past 8 years, where we've seen a revolving door of mayors and instability and political parties unable to do the bigger thing, to see the bigger picture, which is what is in the best interest of the citizens of Johannesburg. So in terms of what happens now, well, firstly, the mayor needs to find himself, find his team, but secondly, they need to move on those concrete policies and the ability to pass budgets. That's going to be very, very important, because without those budgets, the council unable to implement any of the policies. And so that's going to be key in the next, say, 3 to 6 months. Can we see movement in implementation?
But Morero does face opposition from some parties in council. How might the presence of strong opposition figures influence Morero's governance, but also his decision-making process?
Certainly, you know, he faces, you know, challenges, and he faces, set opposition, you know, to his leadership, notwithstanding the traditional sort of opposition in the likeness of the DA, whose candidate only managed to score 60 seats in terms of support. But when you look across the board, you think of the Herman Mashaba's Action SA with its 44 seats. They are certain to achieve the speakership, in that particular council. But time will tell whether a growing sort of ambition from that party will be met in terms of the role they can play in terms of the mayoral team. And then you have the likes of Mkhonto Wesizwe, you have the likes of other parties who themselves are likely to make a play or likely to make their voices known in the affairs of Johannesburg. And this all happens, you must remember, in a time where nationally there are so many moving parts in our politics. We see what's happening in the EFF. We see the shifts that are happening in the MK, but also we see the developments and how the government of national unity and to another extent the government of provincial unity is flowing out. And so given these developments in South African politics, Morero finds himself in a challenging space where he cannot necessarily depend on provincial and national sources of power because both those spaces have become contested and diluted. The ANC is no longer the majority party in national politics. The ANC only got about a 34% in Gauteng and has been further weakened in terms of its provincial outlook. And so he is a mayor who is coming from a party that is far weaker than in even the time when he was first elected in 2022. So those are fundamentally the differences between now and 2 years ago when he had this position.
Let me thank you for your time, Musa Mdunge. He's a
My
political
pleasure.
analyst giving us his perspective, of course, on our leading story, that is Dada Morero, who returns as Johannesburg mayor.